You are listening to Aim Higher, a Catholic podcast designed to instruct and to encourage the daily practice of our faith. Pax et Bonum, peace and good to you all. This is Aim Higher podcast with Father Anthony and Sister Catherine. And, well, we're here today to discuss the life of our Holy Father, St. Francis of Assisi, as we are coming to the feast of St. Francis, October the 4th. So it's very appropriate for us to talk about the life of our Holy Founder, our example, the one who gave us physically the ideal, which is really the ideal of Christ himself. And that is the job of a founder of a religious order, is to set it, you want to put it this way, to set the tone, to set the lifestyle that we're all supposed to embrace. If you call yourselves the son or daughter, if you call yourself the son or the daughter of St. Francis, we have to look to embrace those ideals. And I think it's interesting. It would be interesting, sister, just to begin something we've said before. One thing we all know about Franciscans, that there are two kinds: St. Francis and the rest of us.
Yes, that's very
St. Francis was such a dynamic and not.
That's our street. Sorry.
Oh, that was my street. Okay, is that dynamic? I would say almost controversial individual in the sense of throughout history, how he's been looked at and he's been examined and studied, not by just Catholics, but even non-Catholics who look at various aspects of his life. It's, I guess, inspirational to a lot of people. You examine what this holy man who just turned his back on the things of this world, and it's like, why did he do it? But so many seem to miss the mark of what was the impetus, what drove Saint Francis of Assisi to look to imitate Christ so perfectly, look to embrace the Gospels. I think I mentioned before about, you have various movies about the life of St. Francis. Unfortunately, probably the one in the 1960s with Patrick that's his first name?
No, it's not his first name.
Not Patrick. It's Dillman. Yeah, I don't know why I said Patrick. Got his name, but I don't. Bradford.
Yeah, I think it's
Bradford Dillman. It's probably the best, the closest that I've seen. The thing is, we're not talking. This is not to be a movie review, but I had to say to people, if they watch it, they'll be like, "No, this Bishop Lewis talked about that movie," and he's like, "This is really not accurate. It's not that great." His big objection is seemed to make Saint Clare almost like his girlfriend, and they were like the same age. Or actually, there was quite a no. That was his outlook. As
Okay.
even like they were close friends. It made them look like they were part of the same social circle. But that was not the case, as she was of nobility and he was of the merchant class. And there was about, I think, almost like a 10-year age difference between them. I'm not exactly sure on the top of my head, but that movie was based upon Louis Duval's book, The Joyful Beggar. So there was a lot of liberty taken.
But it is pretty decent. I mean, it's definitely the least offensive.
Yeah.
We've talked about that. It gives you, as long as you go to open minded, and this isn't, this isn't gospel, but it's just.
Well, there's liberties taken. It's based off the life, and yeah, I'm not being a movie critic here, but you have to take certain liberties in order to move a story along. And following a book that has a structure is a lot easier than breaking up the life, taking the life of St. Francis by St. Bonaventure as your guide, and it would have been a lot more work. So it's just easier that way. But what brought to my mind was the one that came out in like 1995 with Mickey Rourke and with Helena Bonham Carter, just called Francisco. And that movie was just, I didn't even finish it. It was
That's
so
one of the
bad.
offensive ones, yeah.
But that was most offensive. And the element that was taken out, which is the whole reason I went on this rant, was they took out the spiritual element. You did not see his conversing with God. Yeah, they show it was very internal. Maybe it was suggested, but you really should have demonstrated his conversation with God. And everything he did, you'd look at him like he just snapped and went crazy. And I know that's how the world looked at St. Francis
in his own time. Yeah.
in his own time. But we have, fortunately, hindsight is 2020. We can see what was driving him and the spiritual encounter that he had with God, because he was called to be a new light in a dark age. He was called, as it said, when the world had grown cold, God rose up the little poor man of Assisi in order to regenerate the life of the church, spiritual life of the church.
Well, and it's interesting because you brought up even in the secular world, there are a lot of people that do admire him, but I kind of wonder how great can that admiration really be, because they don't recognize what drove him, what really what gave him to do all those things, which was his love for God. And so it's just it's kind of weird. Like, the English language is weird in many aspects too, but admiration, like, what are they admiring? I mean, they probably think, well, what would be his reaction if he was here now, especially because, not that we're going to get political, but the whole like climate change, they probably would be like, oh, St. Francis of Assisi would stand for all this, and I don't know, but
well, the thing is, you brought up that point, and his love of God, but not just his love of God, but also extends to his love of Holy Mother Church,
or
his
even
being obedient son of Holy Mother Church.
And not even just that, but his love for Christ crucified. Because we're because we're a world where we really don't want to suffer. I mean, everyone suffers to a degree every day, but yet we really we don't utilize those opportunities. We resent them when we rather look at them as an opportunity. So that's why St. Francis of Assisi is so great, not just because he's the father of our order. He is one of the greats in the Catholic Church because of his love for Christ crucified, which we'll get into elements of how apparent that is as we go along. But
it was the driving force of St. Francis, the love of Christ, the love of our Lord's sacred humanity, which is really kind of the distinctive characteristic of Franciscan spirituality. Not saying that there's not elements of that in other orders, but it's predominantly Franciscan. But as I just said, just kind of want to go back to what I was saying about the church. St. Francis was called the complete Catholic and apostolic man. And that's what made St. Francis, his journey, different. Because in his time, there were other movements that wanted to embrace the gospel, like the Waldensians and such. And problem is, you also had the Albigensians who had their influence, and they became really occult. They just popped up into my mind. I can't really think of a lot of really. I mean, I know they had an abhorrence for the idea of marriage, pretty much because they considered it like justifying sexual intercourse. which was material, and that makes it evil because anything of the body is evil, and only the spiritual is good, which is just it was really just a recreation of Manichaeism that St. Augustine was part of. So this is kind of what was influencing a lot of people, and basically the Poor Men of Lyons was another one. They started off with the right idea, but in doing that, they separated themselves from the church. They became heretics, apostates. St. Francis, his movement was characterized by his submission to Holy Mother the Church. Yes, he was very insistent because, as he said in the rule, nobody has instructed me what to write but Christ himself. He still knew he had to go to Rome. He still knew he had to submit himself to the Holy Father. And that was the thing that stood out with St. Francis among all these others. And it's that loyalty for Christ's bride, the church, that kept St. Francis in orthodoxy. It kept him from going to an extreme, or at least one of the elements that helped him, because being guided by God, and as long as you have a good heart and you remain orthodox, then you're on the path of, well, really the path of Christ. But there are many people say, I'm on the path of Christ, I'm following this inspiration, but they can be led astray. They can begin with a right idea, but without obedience, without submission to the proper authority, it's going to lead you into heresy. It's going to lead you into a false spirituality.
Because I think when you don't take that step, you're going to think about, well, this was my doing. You might have started out with like, well, this is to give God greater honor, glory, but as maybe if things progress and you see succession, you're going to attribute that to yourself. Like that'll at least be a temptation. Whereas St. Francis, going through the proper way, I guess, was able to avoid that, because ultimately when you submit, you're submitting to God. So
our Lord said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And you have to understand the role which his holy church plays in the salvation of souls. And if you ignore that, you don't want to accept that, then you're going to find these other paths. You're going to find, you're going to try to find your own way, but call it Christ's. Mm-hmm. That's what St. Francis avoided. And one of the ways in which he avoided was in his development of his own spirituality, and which is the characteristic of his order. But St. Francis himself had to go on this spiritual journey and throughout his whole life. And that's kind of interesting thing when you think of someone who is in authority. And even though they have to guide others, remember, they still have to go through their own spiritual struggles. They still have to go through temptations and the devil. And the greater your office is, the more responsibility you have, the more the devil's going to come at you. The more you're going to have to engage in the spiritual combat. And St. Francis engaged. There are many instances spoken of in his life, in the life of St. Francis according to St. Bonaventure, in the Little Flowers of St. Francis, the Legend of the Three Companions, where he speaks of these struggles with temptation, and also noting how these temptations are actually an aid to us because it helps us remain humble, gauge the humility. It's like, you want to know how humble you are? As St. Francis said, wait until you are tempted. And then how do you react? That's when you'll know how humble you are.
And I mean, I didn't really understand this until maybe it was something I read when I came here. So, like in the last 10 years, that, and I don't know where my understanding got, I don't know, messed up. based on like catechism, but who knows? But I didn't understand that temptations themselves are not sins. Like, and it took a long time to kind of work with that. Like, something pops to your brain, push it out. You're not consenting. You have not sinned. And I know it can be very hard to kind of guide that to some degree, but I guess just to put that here for our listeners.
Well,
temptations are not sins. And if you let yourself believe that they are, it's mentally exhausting.
Well, the thing is, I think we are prone to the idea that if I am holy, then I will not have these sinful thoughts enter my mind. I will not have a sinful desire enter my heart. I will not lose my temper. These things would not happen because I'm supposed to be holy. And understanding that the only time that's going to end in our lives is in heaven. It's where we're working, we're desiring to enter. That's what our whole point in our life is salvation. That's the only time it's going to end. You're always going to have temptations. The devil is always going to come at you with his other agents, the world and the flesh. So, and in many ways, and it takes a conscious effort, and we're going to get into this in a little bit in discussing life of St. Francis, but it takes a conscious effort in that to recognize and to thank God for these temptations, because the just man, I think it was Proverbs, the just man, as gold is purified by fire, so is the just man by the fire of tribulation. That's what temptations are. They're tribulations. As small as they can be, we think of big things that happen in our life, legal issues, family issues, social issues, are those huge things. But it's those little things that we deal with every day, is that what we work to overcome and conform ourselves with Christ, in that we're able to deal with these things that we call big and actually reduce them so that they're not as big as we perceive them. And that's.
I was reading something a lot talking about those little tiny crosses and how you react to those will help you react better to the bigger ones. And the thing is, most of the time we are dealing with smaller crosses. I mean, yes, we all have big things happening to us, but when you average it out, it's like a lot of small things. So it's like, I'm trying to remember what it was I was reading on that. But it's just, so take them seriously, but not so seriously that you shut yourself off from seeking the help to overcome it, which would be obviously prayer, asking God for help. And when you were bringing up the whole with the temptations, and when people say, well, I've mastered this, so it shouldn't be this, I should this, and the common thing in there was the word I. And that's the thing. It's because again, you're thinking you're doing this, and just.
It's like I thought I was over this. I thought I overcame this flaw, especially if it's something that deals with like a vice that we have unfortunately developed. I thought I overcame this. It's like, why did I fall? And you're right. It goes to I. And if we, you ever seen the joke in some shows or movies where a person goes, it's like, what did I do to deserve this? And then they go, oh yeah. Then they think about, and people laugh. It's like, because we all know, yeah, we all did something where we could deserve this happening to us. It's not just one thing. We're all sinners. We've all done something. Even if you're talking about the little child that just said no to his mom and dad, and he had the use of reason. He knew, and he just disobeyed. Someone said, well, that's such a little thing, but it's still a sin. It's still something wrong that the child did, and that the child is going to have to make up for at some point in his life, even if his life is a short one. So people say, well, I'm not discussing what the gravity of it is and what we'd all have to go through with each sin, no matter how grievous it might be. I'm just saying it's all going to have to be made up for. And we do that through the trials that we deal with, and even the trials of temptations, those tribulations, help make up for the stain left over by sin, and for the temporal punishment due to sin, I should say. And if we recognize that, we should not be so surprised that we have to deal with these things. And I think that's the thing that takes us aback. We get surprised. And I think, and I've talked about this, we've discussed it, and a point of accepting God's will. And I think that so much of it is that we want to accept God's will as long as it's not inconvenient. Mm-hmm. And we have to realize, we have to say, no, I want God's will, even if it's not convenient for me, even if I have to go through something very difficult. If it's God's will, that's what I accept. And that takes a conscious effort. It's not just saying it once, it's saying it often throughout your day. I mean, those little prayers, every little thing you offer, you have God's will in your mind. Even if it's not directly in your mind, that is the base intention of your entire life.
And if you're faithful, yeah, and if you're faithful to saying that morning offering, that is what you are promising. Yeah. That's why I love that prayer, and that's what we bring up often. You want to start somewhere. Start with just saying the morning offering. Make it a quality prayer. Like as a bishop brought up even today, talking with someone, because they feel like they're not a very good Catholic. They don't do a whole lot, but that what she is striving for is her morning prayers and the rosary at night. And she's like, what more should I do? And he said, well, first focus on the quality of those things.
Yes.
Make sure those are of quality. And I was sitting there like listening, I was like, yeah, I really need to, how attentive am I during my rosary? Am I really in office? Like, it's or even there's a lot of great books that I really want to read, a spiritual life, but it's, I also have to be at the right mindset for it. Reading a lot of books and saying, okay, I read it. I think spiritual books, I think, are different in that way.
Yeah.
I used to be able to devour books pretty easily in my youth, but now when it gets to a spiritual book, I'm like, why can't I just why is this so hard for me? Why am I not getting it? I remember one of the very first books the bishop gave me when I came here was The Ideals of St. Francis of Assisi. And that is not an easy book.
No,
it's a lot.
And
I struggled reading that.
I read it.
And he didn't give me like a timeline. I figured I probably needed to finish it before my postulancy, so roughly 6 months. But I struggled through that book. I remember like staying up and falling asleep, and I'm like, I have no idea. And the only thing I really actually remember very distinctly in reading that book was that the feast that when St. Francis was called to the church, and he was told to rebuild my church, that fell on the feast of St. Matthias the Apostle. Mm-hmm. And the reason why that sticks in my head is because the feast of St. Matthias is February 24th, which is my birthday, but birthdays don't count in the Franciscan order. But it's like, okay, that's like the biggest thing that stuck out into me, that book, and it's very significant, but I probably should pick up that book again at some point.
The idea of St. Francis is it's very extensive, and I think it's one of those books that you can't just read once. You read it, you get an idea of what the book is, and then you go back to it. And spiritual books, we've talked about many times here on the podcast, they can't be read like novels. You take a bit at a time. And I like I've mentioned before, my first time trying to read Humility of Heart, I was just trying to read it.
Yep.
And I was so overwhelmed and bored because I was like 14, but I was reading it wrong. It's supposed to be read a little bit at a time. But of course, I have promoted this book many times, and I use it. is the Franciscan Perfection by Father Cesar Torres. And I think that's a great introduction to anyone who wants to understand St. Francis. I think you need to read the life of St. Francis first to get an idea really of kind of how this is all laid out. But it really opens the mind to Franciscan perfection and spirituality, and better than any book I've read on the topic, really for the novice. But the ideals really delve into deeper. And you talked about something that I remember. The thing that stood in my mind was about St. Francis's devotion to the Eucharist. I didn't say it was, and I remember I said it distinctively, the Eucharist was not St. Francis's primary devotion. It was his devotion.
God in my all.
God in my all.
And when I brought up, throwing shade at the bishop, but it's just like, it is wisdom. I mean, it was still the right thing. As hard as that book was to read, at least I can say I persevered. So there's always, you don't always understand what your superior's intentions are. And of course, you just go with it. But I do, maybe after I read Franciscan Perfection, which you gave me a copy and I have not yet picked it up. So.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book. And actually a lot of what I look to go into today, a bit of inspiration from that book itself, not directly quoting from the book. I'm kind of avoiding a lot of quotes. A lot of what looking is what I remember, what I recall, what means most to myself, to you, on these topics. And now we're actually kind of getting into what we're going to actually discuss so much, the life of St. Francis and who he was, who he is to us as Franciscans, and also to the whole church at large. But to look at the life of St. Francis in a retrospective into his life, I should say, but by following the 3 ways to perfection. And the 3 ways, the Purgative Way, the Illuminative Way, and the Unitive Way. And actually, in some ways, and I always use the conformative way as far as the illuminative, and actually in many ways, that's kind of like a middle subdivision between the purgative and the illuminative. It's actually the element of conformity, actually, I should say, is woven in all the other ways, because it's all about conformity to Christ. Now, I'll start off just by short explanation of these ways. Purgative Way is the purifying of the soul in view of obtaining the intimate union with God. So, in the Purgative Way, this is where a person examining their conscience looks at their life and saying, what is holding me back from this deeper union with God? And first off, mortal sin. If we have a mortal sin, a vice that has overtaken our lives, that is the first thing that must be eliminated. As it says, I forget which book I read that in. I think it might have been Imitation of Christ. If you want to take out an army, you have to first take out the captain, the head. Actually, I think that was spiritual combat. And it sounds like spiritual combat. And that's the first step. So what is the primary sin that's holding you back? Is it sins of impurity, pride, avarice? Look, examine and be honest with yourself. What is it? What is it? Vanity? Gossiping? Calumniating people? What is it? Especially when you delve into what is a mortal sin. Okay? After that, which of course, how to overcome that, it's those things. It's prayer, meditation, mortifications, which you find in, well, also certain elements of prayer, but self-denial, almsgiving, fasting. Okay. It's like there's no particular fast track in this. And well, Louis de Montfort might say, Father, I disagree with you, but we'll all union, I say union, but devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. I'm going to add that as another point because Louis de Montfort is right. Devotion to Mary is also a very important one because being our mother and a guide, she is a very important ally in this journey of perfection. So those things, uh, prayer, prayer being meditation and such, uh, mortification, avoiding the occasions of sin, devotion to Mary. And again, with mortification, fasting, almsgiving, and self-denial. Self-denial can show itself in so many ways, whether it's a denial in the way that we dress, a denial in our conversations, not getting the last word, but just, doing whatever is difficult for us for the love of God and offering to him as a sacrifice. So in those things, we look to overcome the mortal sin, overcome vice. And it's possible. It just requires cooperation with the grace of God and the will to do so. Now, after that, in the purgative way, we're looking to purify ourselves from willful venial sins. And everything that I mentioned before is also used in overcoming this as well. But we can't have the idea, well, it's just a venial sin, even if it's willful. It still ends with the word sin. It's still an offense against God. After mortal sin, venial sin is the greatest evil. So we have to recognize what that is. Yes, we might not lose the state of grace, but our soul is still weakened. And if there are too many venial sins that we allow to get in, our soul will be weakened to the point that we could fall into mortal sin. That's why it's encouraged to go to confession often to examine one's conscience. But to be aware of those things that we do that are sinful, even though venially sinful, and to overcome that as well. And then in that, recognizing that we do have those venial sins that are not willed, but that result from our fallen human nature, our bad habits that we have had, and recognizing that they're there to humble us because we are still creatures. We're not all completely perfect as Almighty God. So to minimize those as much as we can by being aware, but when we fall into it, whether it's like a burst of anger just comes out, we don't will it, but it comes out. We recognize that, well, I didn't cooperate with God's grace. I'm still a human. And praise be to God. It's just recognizing that reality, and it's still good in our spiritual formation. Because remember, Scripture says, even the just man sins 7 times a day. So that's what Scripture is alluding to, that those unwilled venial sins, that because of our imperfection, our fallen human nature, we can still be prone to, and it keeps us humble, keeps us recognizing that we need God. So that's with the purgative way. And may I say one more thing on the purgative way, sister, before we go to the illuminative and our open discussion, is that the purgative way and those steps that I have mentioned do not end. You go to the illuminative, enter the unitive way. It doesn't mean, oh, I can stop fasting. I can stop praying as much. I can stop meditating. I can stop having to give alms. I can stop doing all these things. No, we must continue those things. Yes, the intensity of it may lessen from time to time due to whether or not we have to make up for sin and that we have to do penance. Or during a certain time of the year, whether it be during Holy Week especially, or during the Christmas seasons, those times in the liturgical year that the church gives us, Lent, it still has to remain. And even if it's not something that we can follow as a strict schedule all the time, there still has to be that element, and we find those little things. And we've talked about so much about the living in the presence of God and keeping him in your mind. Those things, it doesn't end. We always have to be on the purgative way. It's not that you take the purgative way and then it veers off into the illuminative way. See, Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. So these ways are merely just different stages. It's still the same road that we're going on, the same road. It's just you get to another checkpoint. And it's the question whether or not you're going to have to walk back or move forward. So I guess that's a way of explaining the way, that it's not just veer off and you can forget something.
Well, it's kind of like the idea of journey to better health.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the idea that, well, if I lose all this weight, then I can go back and I can just eat whatever I want, and that might work in your teens and 20s.
Sister,
not that
you hit me to the quick.
Not to advocate for the youth really feeling the need to take care of your health, yes, but diet culture, I'm not going to get into all that. But they're always, in my line of work prior to this, I dealt with that a lot, talking with people, like, and they'd be so obsessed over just a few more pounds, but they wanted that wiggle room so that they could just eat whatever they want. And when you actually, because the thing is, generally people know of someone that's thin that can eat whatever they want and they don't gain weight. But what they don't realize, those people actually only seem to do those things. They still, you know, they can stop. They can have a treat, but they can stop. And maybe like they have a heavier meal at dinner, and they don't eat again until later that day because they don't feel the need. Whereas people that maybe have the desire to want to eat whatever they want and not gain weight, but that's not what's working out for them, still have a disordered relationship where, you know, they eat something they enjoy and just keep going more and more and more. Like their brain's not telling them to stop, like someone who naturally does that. But I guess what I was getting at is that ultimately you need to take care of your health, your mental health, and your spiritual life, and in ways to develop habits that you can keep up for a lifetime. You know, they really all do go similarly. You know, just as you really shouldn't strive to lose weight in a way that you can't keep up the rest of your life. You know, to maintain is a lot of work, but it's the little disciplines that make it possible. And you see that again with your physical health, with your mental health, and then of course your spiritual health.
It's not surprising that there are parallels with this, because, you know, we are, I gotta stop saying that. We are.
I'm trying not to say, but it's not working now.
we are, creatures of spiritual and physical. We are spiritual and physical, and we have to look for a harmony with both, and and there's always that element of conditioning. You can't stop, but you see that there's a change in lifestyle. And we talk about the spiritual life, with everything we talk about the purgative way. This is a change in lifestyle. You might not be used to praying this. You're not used to setting a schedule or saying a daily rosary or doing this, or having to or learning to adjust things when situations occur, but still getting in your prayers. Not like you like you, you become scrupulous about it, but just understanding the necessity of maintaining and conditioning yourself to well, hopefully to grow better, to enter into the next checkpoint into the illuminative and unitive way. But it always, you always have to go back to that to maintain yourself. And but you're right. We've talked about this. We talk about health stuff all the time. This is kind of a big conversation because I've had in the last few weeks, issues with my health. Nothing, people have to worry about, but it's just a reminder of the changes in lifestyle. And as a priest with all the traveling, it's easy just to get, not eat right and not get enough activity and everything that we do, and water. And but you can put in the time. You can do these things. And that's one thing. I guess this is my online testament of this. You can do this, but it is a lifestyle change. Like the sister mentioned, doing something hard to maintain, but you can do it for a while, like a diet, like you're kind of cleansing yourself. And spiritually speaking, I kind of attribute that to like Saint Ignatius of Loyola's spiritual exercises that will span like 30 days, being on a retreat. You're not able to maintain it all the time, mostly because our lifestyle does not afford us to do that. But sometimes we can. Sometimes our schedule works out. Yes, I can do this extra praying. I can do this extra meditation. I can do these things. But we might not be able to maintain it all the time. But the general lifestyle is what has been altered. And what are we going to do, to maintain? So, like for me right now, I'm at kind of that retreat mode. I have to, reset my body. And that's what I'm going through right now. So that's why I kind of feel, I feel great in one aspect, but when you're detoxing, you feel horrible in another one. So that's I guess a little back. Well, I guess it's kind of fitting. I mentioned something because I know you put online about my not feeling well. I actually had someone, no, you posted on YouTube.
Oh, well, that you're just catching up from your trip from Chile.
Yeah, still recovering from that. But people, say, are you feeling better, Father? You're doing well. That's kind of what it is. And not just,
we
and
had
you
an
just,
unintended break.
yeah, and the so you see the parallels in the spiritual life with this, and I think it's so much of it. We're all promoting proper health, physically, as not just the spiritual. You're promoting both. Saint Francis. Okay, yes, he was a special case. He was the founder of an order. He was called for a greater degree of self-denial. But to his brothers, he was very strict that they don't go to extremes. So, well, that's kind of a hypocrite. No, because they were not Saint Francis. God does call certain souls to suffer more than others, to do certain things that normally we wouldn't do, because it's kind of difficult for us for a scourging or extreme fastings. But certain souls are given a grace in which they endure this. And, you leave that to God. You leave that with God.
Well, and I think too often, just naturally speaking, a lot of people tend to only pray when something is troubling them, and they often don't think to take the opportunity when you feel well. Like that, if you're feeling great, that isn't necessarily the time, well, I need to tackle some other thing I need to take of, but maybe first I'm feeling good, so why don't I read something or really, my head's clear. This is the time to really pray, because silly me, kind of thought, I would say I envied people that were bedridden and sick and couldn't do anything physical, but they could when they're laid up, they could pray. It's actually
Yeah.
very difficult, and I learned that recently because I was sick. Part of the reason why we just really haven't posted anything was your trip, and then I got on, not that anybody plans to get sick, but I got weirdly sick, and it took me out for
Yeah.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
Because I thought I'd do an episode with the bishop, and that just wasn't going to happen. And I struggled mentally because I couldn't pray as I thought I should have, being sick.
Yeah.
It's
It clouds your
amazing.
mind.
It's
Yeah.
amazing. And I'm like,
It's
even when I try, it's like the quality's not that great. And of course, the bishop reminds me that, God accepts a desire. God knows how much pain you're in. He knows, and trying to offer up that as well, nobly, honorably. And it's just like, am I really suffering well? I don't think I'm suffering well. And it was a very interesting time, and it definitely probably the slap over the head I needed too. But
which when we bring this up, both our ailments in this, it reminds us, if we continue the purgative way in the life of St. Francis, let's look at it. St. Francis was the son of a merchant. He lived a cavalier life. He wasn't a libertine in the sense that he did acts of impurity, but he was, some people call, kind of just a partier. And he did banquets. He would, carouse around the city of Assisi, creating a spectacle. And he lived a lavish life. He liked having nice clothes. He liked just living for the world. I think he was very much, carpe diem, seize the day, and as we live, let us live. So he was very Epicurean in that way.
Well, I was just going to add that he's probably more like us than some of the other saints that we want to maybe try to identify ourselves who had more of a sordid past, like Saint Ignatius or Saint Augustine. Of course, Saint Augustine. I'm not going to get into all that, but
Saint Augustine, yeah, he's a topic for another time.
Right, but or Saint Mary Magdalene, Saint Margaret Catona. Like we sometimes we try to find ways where like those are the saints. Those are my saints. But really, how many of us are probably more like Saint Francis of Assisi? And I'm not saying that some of us have not committed some serious sins, but I think those are like those saints are given to us for our benefit. But generally speaking, I think more of us are just like more worldly, like Saint Francis was.
And when Saint Francis, since he's been called by God for this particular vocation, God allowed certain difficulties to occur in his life for his purgation. St. Francis had great ideals, though. He did. He loved the stories of knights. He had the idea of going on a chivalric quest, very much like a Don Quixote. And in this love, that's why he had a love for maintaining the purity of womanhood and defending the weak. So he had certain Christian ideals that he ascribed to, that he held dear, but unfortunately, it was clouded by his worldliness. St. Francis enlists as a soldier in a war that there was between Assisi and Perugia, and he was taken captive, and he was in prison for a year. Now, there are stories written about it in those biographies of his life, that even during his imprisonment, he maintained a certain level of joviality, and even to the dismay of some of his fellow prisoners. In fact, they say that he had such a noble bearing that they didn't put him in prison with the common soldier, but with the knights and officers, because he portrayed that. And and with St. Francis, and that he did suffer because he did become sick while during his imprisonment, but he did offer it up, uh, with a certain amount of graciousness. He gets home, he's still sick, but it was in this sickness that made him really think about his life, made him really think about God. And those things that when he came back, he still went to parties. He still, went with his friends, but he was more recluse. It didn't have the same effect upon him. And he sought, as I said, being recluse, he sought to why is the word slip my mind? He sought isolation. He sought, taking time into prayer. He would look around the hillsides of Assisi and think about God as being the creator. And these things really uh, really stood out with him. And there's a point we talked about in his life where he was with his friends during a party, and he just kind of veered away from them, and they were asking him, why aren't you following us? Why aren't you, playing with us? Why aren't you doing this? And they thought because he just seemed like a love-struck puppy to them. It's like, are you thinking of getting married? Are you in love? And this is where, with St. Francis being inspired by God to say various things. And in this, he said, yes, I am looking to marry, and I will marry the most beautiful bride the world has ever seen. But in that, he was speaking of Lady Poverty. So these things in his purification, in his suffering, he was coming to a deeper knowledge of God. And of course, we can learn from that. In our sufferings, we can more easily turn to God, just as St. Francis did. And one of the other things that St. Francis learned at this time was having is if you want to have a love of God, you must have the love of neighbor, no matter who the neighbor is. And St. Francis detested lepers. He was particularly disgusted by them. In fact, they'd say that if he's heard the leper's bell that they would ring, he would go well out of his way just to avoid them. He would make sure that he would cover their nose, even the slightest hint of the smell, because it's rotting flesh. It's not pleasant. But in his conversion, in his purifying himself, he had to engage in something that was difficult for him, and he engaged with the lepers. Not only did he speak with them, but he cared for them. He mended their wounds. He fed them if they needed. So in this, he was purifying himself, putting himself in a situation that was repulsive to him at first, but as he has said about many other things, it soon became delightful and a joy. And it was one thing that when any brother would come to the order, they had one of the first things they had to do is start taking care of the lepers. That was kind of St. Francis's test for them. And in that, and you have that, and when you're a young man, even as I said, they're middle class, of the merchant class, they still have a certain amount of propriety in their station. So you have his father, who is a very worldly man, does not like that his son is taking care of lepers, does not like that his son is spending his time praying in dilapidated chapels and spending his time in seclusion in caves or whatever. And so he takes his son. He does, in fact, imprison his son, basically tries to beat this out of him, break his spirit. He does get away. But I believe, if I remember, is that his mother is the one that let him go. And he he continued. I mean, he even separated himself from his father when he was put on trial before the bishop. So I used to call Peter Perdone my father, but now I only say my Father who art in heaven. And this was a trial for him because he was afraid of his father. It took him a while to get to that point. He had to realize, I can't just hide in a cave. I have to face this. And that was another purifying moment for him. The final purifying moment for St. Francis, I would say, is when he took upon himself the task of being a church builder, of actually repairing those dilapidated churches, beginning with San Damiano. And we know the story. The story of St. Francis praying before the Byzantine-styled crucifix, which I have, San Damiano crucifix back there. And during his prayer, he heard the voice. He heard the voice. And actually, in his sickness, he did have God ask him the question, who can better serve you, the master or the servant? He says, the master. Then why do you follow the servant? Sorry, I missed that one. But anyway, there's so much. But that was all part of the purgation in his nightly errands. In this, no longer the knight, he's living the life like the pilgrim. He dressed up in the pilgrim's garb. It's very simple. He lived with the priest and receiving this. Well, actually, that was after the vision, excuse me. But in praying here, asking, God to show him what he has called him to do. And the crucifix comes to life and says, Francis, you see my church has fallen, rebuild it. And this has a threefold meaning. First, as St. Francis understood, building the chapel of San Damiano, rebuilding it, reconstructing it. Also, this has another meaning, which is the dominant one, rebuild my church. Meaning this whole church has fallen into spiritual decay. I'm raising you up to reignite that apostolic fervor that was once there and the deeper spirituality that I want my people to embrace. And then finally, rebuilding the house of his soul, which is what we've been talking about through this path of purgation. So even in his self-denial here, and all the work he did building churches was not going to waste, because you have a young man who's lived, I said, this cavalier life, who's lived a life where pretty much everything was given to him. And now he had to work with his hands. If you start, if you're used to being kind of inside doing clerical work, secretarial work and stuff, which is important work and it can be very difficult. We both know this. But then you start working outside, your hands get rough, your muscles get, are exhausted. So just imagine what this young man was going through doing this, but he was doing it for the love of God. This is what God has instructed me to do. And it said that there were at least 3 churches, and I think there were more, but 3 churches that stand out with San Damiano, St. Peter, and Porciuncula, St. Mary of the Angels, which became the mother church of the order. And after all that, and in purifying himself, you could say, if this is what God called this young man to do for his own soul, be enough. You would say that's enough. You don't need to really look to do more. Just persevere in this and you'll save your soul. But he wasn't called to that, just that for his own salvation. He was called to be an example of the salvation of others, and not just during his lifetime, but through the history of the of the world. So he hears the gospel. He attends Mass. If thou wilt be perfect, go sell what thou hast. Go sell what thou hast, give to the poor. Come and follow me. And hearing that and other scripture passages very similar to that, that is what he wanted to embrace. And that's where we enter into that next part, the Illuminative Way. Sorry, sister, I have dominated up to this point.
That's okay. And I figured no comment at this point, because otherwise we won't get to the other two in a decent time frame.
Yeah, we're kind of going a little over, but
there's a lot to the life of St. Francis of Assisi, and trying to narrow it down into 3 specific points, and and being Franciscans. So, but
well, then we'll go to this next checkpoint to this is the Illuminative Way. And the Illuminative Way has its great aim of the soul in the imitation by positive exercise of Christian virtues, thinking that Jesus is the light of the world, so whoever follows him walks not in darkness. He that followeth me walks not in darkness, but shall have the light of life. So following Christ meant following the gospel. So here we see in the Illuminative Way as St. Francis, again, not just for himself, but for his whole order and the whole church, look to live the gospel and form the rule. And the rule of the Friars Minor begins saying that this is the rule of the Friars Minor, to live our lives according to holy gospel. That's it. And that is what inspired St. Francis to imitation the life of Christ, not just focusing upon our Lord's miracles, not merely focusing upon just his words, but also his human actions. We mentioned that before. That element that separates St. Francis' spirituality, Franciscan spirituality, for so many others, especially in conformity with the Gospels, is the love of our Lord's sacred humanity. Following our Lord's example from like his infancy to his young adulthood, to his adulthood in his ministry, and then most especially following it to the cross, to Calvary. Now, there's so much, because I don't want this to be like a 3-hour video, and it could be a 3-hour video. We're gonna just go back to that point we mentioned earlier, and it's the love of Christ crucified. That point, that central point in the gospel is, if thou wilt be perfect, take up thy cross daily, come and follow me. And that is what St. Francis understood. He saw in this, and wanting to teach his brothers that they had to, if you want to embrace the gospel, you have to embrace the evangelical counsels. If you want to take up your cross, if you want to follow Christ, you have to embrace poverty, chastity, obedience. And it was that strict poverty. They do not own anything. They did not worry about whether they were going to have food for later that day, because as our Lord said, seek first the kingdom of heaven, all will be provided to you. And as St. Francis, who instructed his brothers that you must have the grace of working. You see, that's in the rule. You must have the grace of working. And we earn our daily bread. And if we're not given that, then we return to the table of the Lord in begging. So yes, the Franciscans, a mendicant order, a begging order. That was part of it. You had to go beg. You had to humble yourself and say, please, I need food, or whatever it is that you needed. He did not want the brothers to ask for money, because he abhorred the idea of having any money, although due to economic situations, even during his time, that had to kind of change a little bit to a certain degree, but only for those who are in authority handle that. The lay brother stayed away. I'm not going to get into that because that's a whole nother discussion. But but in this poverty, in this self-denial, in this embracing and imitation of Christ, who was a I forget the word, itinerant preacher. He didn't have one exact place he would stay in. He had, Capernaum is said to be pretty much his home base, but he didn't actually live there. Our Lord just moved from place to place. And that's what the friars did. From place to place and wherever they were needed. And they preached by their example, by this self-denial. So they had that poverty. Chastity, imitating the gospel, imitating our Lord's chastity, our Lord's virginity, wanting to be pure as our Lord. Speaking, he says, you want to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Look to the little child. The innocence of this child is what you should have. The humility of this child is what you should have. The purity. And that's the purity of our Lord. So it is not just a childlike purity, but an angelic purity, which we're called to imitate, as talked in the gospel. And then finally, obedience. Obeying Christ. Christ said, learn of me. He said, learn of me, for I'm meek and humble of heart. But he also said, learn of me. Just stop it there. Learn from Christ. Learn from his holy example. Every aspect of the gospel is a lesson for us to learn. We don't just discard this, it doesn't apply to me. Every part of the gospel applies to you in your spiritual life. And for the Franciscan especially, when your rule is based on the Holy Gospel, you have to acknowledge this. You have to live it. You must be obedient. And that obedience extends to obedience to your immediate superiors and to Holy Mother, the Church, which is the institution founded by Jesus Christ for the salvation of souls. This is why St. Francis, as I said before, was the complete Catholic apostolic man. He had that obedience, that submission. And this keeps the servant of God in check. It keeps him humble. And if I add that one final point, humility. Humility is the key to our salvation. It is thing with humility. If you practice humility, you automatically would be practicing every other virtue. If you have it, as the author of Humility of Heart says, they are those who are in heaven who were not able to practice mortifications because their bodily ailments excuse them. There are those who are not able to give alms because of their social condition excuse them. But there is not a saint in heaven who did not practice humility. And the life of the Friars Minor, and as extends also to the Poor Clares, to the Franciscan tertiaries, is a life of penance and humility, of deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow Christ. That is the rule. That is what we look to follow. And in that, to inspire others, even if they're not Franciscans, to embrace this life in whatever vocation they have and lifestyle, to embrace the Gospels. And in this, St. Francis not only illuminated himself over the years of living this, but also the whole Catholic world, which was running towards him. They were inspired by the poor man of Assisi. Even in this, even affected the conversions of Saracens. Even the the Sultan that he encountered while he was in the Holy Land had an effect upon him. And you see that effect that his children, like a Saint Anthony of Padua, has had on those. He's the hammer of heretics. The effect that Saint Clare had upon even church officials who would go to her for spiritual advice. Saint Bonaventure, the effect that he had in bringing the ideals of Saint Francis and structuring it in a way in which it would be able to thrive in the world and the instruction of new candidates and novices in the Franciscan life. So and there's so many stories of Franciscan saints. It's one of the things we have in the Seraph, taking the Franciscan saints, and it's a beautiful thing that we do. And it's just how he has inspired not just the superficial things that people look at, like his love for animals and the social change. Yeah, these were important things. I said superficial because that's how the way people look at them. We mentioned about St. Francis. St. Francis would have been one for climate change. St. Francis would have been one for, keeping the rainforest and all of that. I said, St. Francis would have promoted, yes, the love of nature. But St. Francis only saw these things as being creatures of God. And if they were hindrances to his spirituality, he would be willing to cut down a tree for that, for a greater cause. But keep in mind that as St. Francis of Assisi also respected nature so much that he only wanted to take what was necessary and then to give back what he could. And we see that demonstrated when he went to Alverna and he had the brothers, making a hut. He said, just take the lower branches. Don't take so much. Leave some for sister birds. St. Francis, and if you look at the Canticle of Brother Sun, there's such a deep spirituality in that. And, probably should, I have a recording of that. Probably should put that online for people to listen to. And of course, that leads us, I mentioned Alverna. I think that leads us now to the Unitive Way in the life of St. Francis. Sister, I'll take a stop here and say anything you want to add. Again, talking a bit here.
No, that's okay. I mean, this is for our instruction, and you are
instructing.
Yes. Much to think about. They have anything to add?
Okay. Going to the final checkpoint of the Unitive Way. I like actually that. I think checkpoint. I'm gonna write that down.
Of course, when I hear checkpoint, I think of Mario Kart. You pass that.
I was trying not to think of Mario Kart. You mentioned the. Okay, I'm gonna kind of go off from this for a moment from the topic. When I was down in Chile, I was down there during the celebration time. Independence
Day.
It's like their 4th of July. Fiesta Patrias. So it was big. I mean, it was. But you have the big celebrations like in the cities and at the Capitol. And then every family has their own little get together. So we had, the faithful down there and extended family come and spend a lot of time with us. It was a lot of fun, a lot of toasting and a lot of songs being sung. And they even let me sing a few songs for them. It was fun because they had kids there. And the adults are all outside, talking and engaging with each other. And I go into the living room and they're the kids. They're no different than American kids in the sense that they all had their faces in their tablets and looking at that. And I had the initial thought like, well, this is kids not engaging with the people, not doing this. And I said, no, wait a minute. I think that isn't really fair for me to say because when we were kids, we weren't sitting there talking with the adults. Even if it wasn't playing on a tablet, we were either playing a game somewhere else or going off doing our own thing. And if one of our cousins or our friend had, a game console and we were playing it, we would play it. We had our own, we would play it. So Mario Kart was one of those things that really stood out. We all liked playing it. So I'm saying, like, it's really, I can't really criticize that because we did the same thing. Now, I'm just saying we could always do better things at our time and look to engage with the kids. I would have engaged with the kids more if I spoke better Spanish, but but they were interesting kids. They would talk to me as best as they could, and it was fun. But yeah.
North Americans aren't too different from South Americans.
Yeah.
Well, it's finding that balance of, I don't want to say indulging, but just taking part in some worldly entertainment. I mean, there's definitely a lot of good, just as there are things that we should absolutely avoid. So, but having that balance.
Moderation. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So.
Well, final point here to discuss is then the Unitive Way in the life of St. Francis. And if I may add, he continued the purgative way throughout his life in his own sufferings, in everything that he went through, even those trials he had within the order when there was already in his lifetime those who were breaking away, beginning their reinterpreting what he intended. Brother Elias stands out as one. But through all that, he allowed it for his own purification, the purification of his order, and it helped him grow into a deeper conformity with Christ, who was also betrayed by one close to him, Judas Iscariot. In the Unitive Way. Now, when we speak of this, the essential element is that you have united your will with the will of God. You will what God wills. Now, this would be I guess you could say, like, the final stage in the Unitive Way, because the Unitive Way is not just one aspect. There's not just one aspect. There's also the simple idea of the Unitive Way, which it's just taking us into that next phase, be illuminated by Christ. And it's called, if you look into like the spiritual life by Tanqueray, the simple Unitive Way, which there are three conditions that characterize it: a great purity of heart, a great mastery over self, and a constant need of thinking of God. Now, as you can see, what stands out here? It's active. It's the active intention to unite yourself with God, to have the purity of heart, the purity of intention in what you do. To purposely put forth that effort in doing all this for Christ, seeing Christ in everything you do, thus elevating this to something supernatural and receiving supernatural merit. A great mastery over self. Well, again, we've talked about how the Purgative Way and Illuminative Way still remain, and it is continuing these practices, mortifications, and prayers to maintain that mastery over self, where you are like a pond that does not ripple when a stone is thrown in it. You're a calm. Or if it ripples, it does not affect you. And then finally, a constant need of thinking of God. It's not that I want to, it's like, okay, now it's time for me to meditate and think of God. Like, you would rather not. I don't want to talk about these worldly things. I don't want to discuss this event or that event. I just want to think of God. I just want to be united with him. I don't want to worry about all this other stuff. that's still an active attempt, um, engaging in this actively. Then there's the passive, which is the next stage. I could have I could call it an active, unitive, and a passive, where there is that infused grace coming from God to this special soul, where he inspires and talks to the soul in a more intimate way, where your unity with God is not just theoretical, it's practical. It is part of your entire being and existence. And God speaks to you into your heart. With St. Francis, there's also actual discussions with God who would appear in various apparitions, whether it was to the saints, the Blessed Mother, or himself. And being witnessed by others so they can record it to be an inspiration of how God can speak to his soul. And you see that with many saints whom God has appeared to. He speaks and he infuses this knowledge and this extra grace in that soul. So that's what we saw about the unitive way. And we see it in the life of St. Francis, I think, really shown in 3 events that occurred near the end of his life. The nativity scene in the town of Greccio, receiving the stigmata at Mount Alverna, and at the Porciuncula, his holy death. They say 2 years before he died, St. Francis was inspired to ignite to the people a love of the child of Bethlehem. Because remember, he loved the humanity of our Lord. And he wanted not just himself, but others to be united and to see the scene live. So this is why he enlisted the help of various noblemen and the people to help create this nativity scene, live nativity scene in the forest of Greccio. And a grand procession during midnight mass of people with candles coming to the scene, and an altar was placed there, and holy mass was said, and St. Francis, being the deacon, chanted the gospels and took the little statue of the Christ child and laid it in the manger. And it is said that Christ child did come to life in the hands of the poor man of Assisi, inspiring others. This is a miracle, but it shows how he wanted to unite himself with the child of Bethlehem in all innocence and in all poverty. That even though he spent most of his adult life now living the gospel, he still earned more. He still wanted to go to that scene and to embrace it more deeply. So I would say he was inspired. And when you put up your nativity scene, think of St. Francis, and think of why he did this. What was the purpose of it? To inspire us. More to be said on Mount Alverna. When St. Francis was about to begin his fast of St. Michael, because he had a great devotion for St. Michael the Archangel, he requested to go to Mount Alverna, which was gifted to him. I think it was Count Orlando. And he went with his brothers, where he went with 2 brothers. And even when he was with his brothers, he still stayed at a place away from them. So much I could talk about that in Alverna, but the most important part is this. in his prayer, St. Francis, desiring to be united with Christ, a sacred humanity, that he requested two things. One, to experience the love that moved Almighty God to sacrifice his only Son for the salvation of mankind. That love that Jesus Christ himself, who willingly accepted the will of his Father, and now in his sacred humanity, remember, the humanity and the divinity of Christ, though united, are two distinct things. So in his humanity, he conformed himself to the divine will. But what moved Christ himself to want to experience the passion for the love of mankind, that love that prompted him? And then St. Francis requested to experience, as far as humanly possible, the pains that Christ endured. I believe it was the next day or it would have been a few days, because it was he requested this on the Feast of the Exaltation of the Holy Cross. So it would have been about 3 days later, on the 17th, as we know as the Feast of the Stigmata. St. Francis received, or was granted, I should say, his request. He had felt within his soul a love he never experienced, a consolation of soul that perhaps if it was any one of us, we would have died from. And then he received the vision of the seraph coming down from heaven, who was in the form of Christ crucified, and put upon his body the stigmata, the wounds of Christ. He conformed himself to the life of Christ, embracing the Holy Gospel, taking on himself the name, the mirror of Christ. He lived a life, and now he had to enter into the passion with Christ, taking on these wounds. And they were not just marks. He experienced the pain of these wounds. He was frequently shedding blood. In fact, it said that even the nails were formed in his hands and his feet. So St. Francis was going to endure for the remainder of his life the pains here, which he so willingly accepted, because he wanted to imitate Christ all the way. His health was now failing, ailment in his eyes, his body being, broken and worn down with labor, and now adding the stigmata. His death was imminent. And he wanted to embrace whom he would call Sister Death in a way that would be conformed with Christ, who embraced his death, who said on the cross, "It is consummated. Father, to thee now I give my spirit." St. Francis knew his end was near. He requested to be taken to the Porciuncula. He requested to be put onto the floor so he would die with nothing. He requested that his brothers come to him. They would chant the Miserere. They would sing the canticle of Brother Sun. He made his last will and testament, saying that I have done what it is mine to do. Now it is time for you to do what is yours to do. And how it echoes what St. Paul said: I have run the course, I have kept the faith, and now the prize awaits me. This is what St. Francis is saying. And even in all that, he apologizes to Brother Body for being so rough on him all these years. And he unites himself now with Christ in his holy death. So his whole life now leads to this moment that he aspired to. Now he can be united with his love, his crucified love. Because this love that he had for Christ extends beyond time. It is eternal. But he only found that in embracing Christ crucified, Christ poor, and Christ humble. That is the life of St. Francis of Assisi. And that is why he is such a great inspiration for all of his children and for the Catholic Church at large and the whole world. Take up your cross, embrace Christ, and live a holy life and have a happy death, because you are now to enter eternity, to be reunited with Christ, with the Blessed Mother, all the saints and angels, and to experience the beatific vision of the most blessed Trinity. These are the things that St. Francis thought about, which we too must live for. Well, sister, do you have anything you'd like to say unto this point?
Well, I think what you put together was very, very encouraging, very inspiring, and I'm grateful for it. Can't wait to listen back on it. I guess just a final thought is that part of the reason why we chose this topic is because of the upcoming feast day, October 4th, being the feast of St. Francis of Assisi.
Yes.
Assisi. I don't know. I felt like that didn't sound quite right. But this year marks 45 years since Bishop Lewis, who had been Father Lewis at that time, said the first mass here at the property in Rochester. So, and actually, the closing on the house was actually the day after, but he arranged it to be able to say mass on the feast of St. Francis of Assisi. So October 4th, 1979, 45 years ago, was the first mass. So that's kind of
it's, with that said, we could actually do an episode just kind of explaining those things, what Bishop Lewis went through to do that. In order to do what? Why did Bishop Lewis go through all that? His first thing that was prompting him was maintaining the Franciscan life. You'd call it the traditional Franciscan life, but the Franciscan life in conformity with the gospel in this modern world, which offers its own interesting dynamics. But it was the life of St. Francis that was the inspiration, which is a life in conformity with Christ, and that's what moves the Franciscan and someone like Bishop Lewis in this. And I'm knowing Bishop Lewis, he would have saw that as providential. October the 4th, this must be. And so it is a special day, not just for the whole order, but for our community, and reminding us that no matter how small a community may be, it does not dictate whether or not you are right, because we remember how many individuals were at the foot of the cross. And there were only very few individuals there at that mass. And what an experience. We should write down that we're going to talk about that sometime.
Pin in it.
Yeah, put a pin in it. So, but there again, that's what also prompted us to do this topic, and hope to have it out soon. so you all can listen to it. And
Should be
God
on
bless
time
St.
for the feast day.
Francis.
Yes.
God bless our Holy Father, St. Francis. And well, with that said, Sister, Deo gracias.